the janitor of the Professional Casual Network, Tim, helping me out there. Think I finally got this working. Pretty new to this kind of stuff. OBS is completely new to me. I've seen it used a little bit, but this is my first time actually using it. So if you're hanging out with us, thank you. I'm a couple minutes late here, but think I finally got it going. So welcome to a grim stream of Perilous lore. I'm going to talk a bit about the Warhammer world, the whole thing. So a couple things I want to talk about before I get into the lore portion. Got a little structure I made up of things I want to talk about. First up is what's gaming. I'll talk about what's new in my gaming world, what's new in the network's gaming world. I got to mention tomorrow night, Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern, we stream on this channel my Marvel Crisis Protocol for, the Power Phase, where we have usually one-on-one throwdowns. Tomorrow, Tim and Big Chuck are throwing down, and they're going to be playing, I believe, Brotherhood and probably Web Warriors. I'm not sure exactly, but that's what they're talking about earlier today, so we'll get to see that. Personally, in my gaming world, other than MCP, which is about all I've played since it came out last November, I just picked up Blood Bowl, the newest version with the Bogenhofen Barons and the Black Orc team. I forgot what they're called, but they look really cool. I built them yesterday. Really excited to try that out. We're going to try to do some streaming of that as well to try out some different things. And I think the fact that it was Bogenhofen, the team they're supposed to be the Imperial Noble team to separate them from the Reichland, I forget what they're called. They're just the human Blood Bowl team. I just like that it's from Bogenhofen with, Grim Podcast of Perilous Adventure taking place there so much. I just thought that was super fitting, and actually just recently sold an entire painted AOS Deepkin army, so I was able to get some cool stuff like that. I think I might also be getting the newer version of the Star Wars Legion starter set with clones and droids, because that looks really cool. I'm still waiting for them to make an Ahsoka model, which I don't understand why we don't have Ahsoka for that game yet. It just kind of blows my mind. They just announced they're coming out with I think it's Admiral or Captain Callus from Rebels. Like, why is he getting a model before Ahsoka? Like, she's whatever. But I want to play a clone army with Ahsoka's troops, where they paint their helmets with her face symbol, like they paint their helmets kind of orangey, and they paint her face symbols on there. Looks really cool. But this show here isn't about Star Wars. It's about Warhammer. So first thing, after What's Gaming, I want to do a little talk about some Black Library stuff that I've read in the past. I am totally an Ahsoka fanboy through and through. Yeah, Danny Cole 31, that is entirely true. And I'm okay with that. I like Ahsoka a lot. I want to talk a little bit about Black Library stuff. A lot of people, when I was announcing this show was coming, asked if I would talk about Black Library books at all, because obviously that's a huge part of the lore. So today I want to talk about one of, if not my favorite, Black Library books, is the Ambassador. This one is actually the Ambassador Chronicles, is a collection. This came out way back in 2005, which I didn't realize was that old, because I feel like I didn't read it that long ago, but apparently it's 15 years. I believe I read it as the Omnibus. It collects two different books, the Ambassador, and also the sequel to it that finishes the story is called Urson's Teeth. And I'm pretty sure this was Graham McNeil's first Black Library book, which is really cool, because if you've read anything Black Library, McNeil is incredibly proficient, and he's written tons for Warhammer and for Warhammer 40k. He wrote my favorites there as well, the Eisenhorn trilogy. Fantastic books. But the Ambassador Chronicles are really cool. I think one thing that really stuck out for me is it really set in stone the low fantasy aspect of Warhammer, and one reason why I love the setting so much. Before I got into Warhammer, I was kind of getting into D&D type stuff. I had read, what's it called? Some of the Drizzt Do'Urden books by R.A. Salvatore. And the Ambassador was kind of a breath of fresh air, that it was so low-key, low fantasy. Yet Johnny Trash is 2005 is like yesterday. Sometimes it seems like it. I think back to 2005, I was in my first or second year of college, depending on which half of 2005 you're talking about. So I had a lot of free time back then, so I read a lot. I actually took the bus to see Danny was going to school in Oswego. I was going to school in Potsdam, if anybody knows where those places are. I know a lot of our audience for Warhammer stuff is in England and Europe, so they have no idea where those places are, I'm sure. It was like a 3-hour bus ride before I could drive, because I did that a little bit earlier or later than some people, and I read a lot of books on those bus rides because it was before cell phones were much of a thing. I may have had a cell phone at that. I did have a cell phone at that point. I couldn't do much on it. You could play like Bejeweled, which I think everybody had at that point. I read a lot. I remember one point, because I was so far north and near the border of New York to Canada, we would get stopped and do routine search by Border Patrol every once in a while. Every few trips, they would come by, and one guy actually noted that I was reading a Gotrek and Felix book, and he was like, "Oh, I've read those before," and I was like, "Really? Okay, cool." And he was like, "I see your ID," and I was like, "Oh yeah, I forgot I have to do that part." Snake. Oh, the snake on the phone? Yeah, probably. I remember playing a lot of Bejeweled on early cell phones. I don't know why. But the Ambassador Chronicles really stood out to me because the main character, Caspar von Velten, I think his name was just a cool dude because he was a retired general of the army of the Empire, and he got assigned as an ambassador, shocking, to Kislev. And I love anything snow and ice, so like the cover, I don't know if we can see it right here on my wall. No, that's not the right one. I have this, which arm is it? This Iceman poster, because he's my favorite superhero. So like anything snow and ice, I'm all about. So that's one reason why I picked this one up. Actually, I'm sure my brother picked it up. My brother Tim is the one that got me, not that Tim, a different Tim, got me into Warhammer stuff in general. And I love stuff taking place in Kislev. I love the setting of Kislev. One of the few characters I've actually played in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay was a Kislevite, not a Kossar. I can never remember the name of the career, where you get a rifle and like a halberd that you can use as a stand for the rifle, which was pretty cool. He named his rifle Alexandra, which was really fun to roleplay. But yeah, Caspar goes to Kislev to be an ambassador, and he sees it as kind of like a retirement job. Like Kislev and the Empire get along just fine, so it's not like he was supposed to have a tough job while he was there. But of course things happen, and there's like this string of murders, and he becomes like a detective for it, sort of. And there's like a chaos horde coming towards the Empire. So Kislev, I believe he's in Prague itself. He gets kind of in the middle of all that, and 2005 was right around the time of the Storm of Chaos that got retconned into the end times, so there was a lot to do with like Archaon's armies invading and blah blah blah. So he ended up like leading Empire soldiers. Really cool, really well done. Graham McNeil is a master at this kind of stuff. Is it high literature? No, it's Warhammer. It's supposed to be like pulp type readings. I love it. I've read so many of these. So I'm going to make this a weekly thing. I'll talk about a couple different books I've read throughout the years. The Ambassador Chronicles really sticks out. It has not been great. So I'm going to call the lore focus of the week. I wanted to bring up my little handy dandy notes on my phone. Is the Warhammer world. I want to start with the whole thing. Might as well go big. Start strong like that. I want to talk a bit about the different parts of the world and reasons why I love the Warhammer world so much. I think next week I'm going to focus on the Empire in particular, and I got a request to talk about Albion, which I think I'll make week 3, so I have some time to kind of get a feel for this show and kind of improve things as we go, I am sure. I have my Warhammer 8th edition rulebook behind me. It's a bit of a glare on it, but over my other shoulder I did have the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition core book, but that fell off apparently right before I started. Because of course it did. So I want to talk a bit about the Warhammer world. Boom! There it is. So way back with the 300th issue of White Dwarf, when I feel like Warhammer Fantasy was in its prime. This was right after the Ogre Kingdoms came out. They had a Noblar army list that was awesome. Instead of man-eaters, they had man-biters. They were the best. They had piggyback knights for the Noblar models that came with literally piggybacking on top of each other. They were their own unit. They were their cavalry. It was amazing. But in that issue, it came with this sweet double-sided poster of the old world on one side and this great image of Gromberndal, the White Dwarf, in the snow, like in the middle of a fight. Sadly, again, my brother owned this, so he still has this map, but I had it hanging up in my house for a long time. I guess I had kind of swindled it away for him for a bit, but I love this map. Obviously, it's very familiar. They took our world and kind of twisted a little bit. One of my favorite little tidbits about things is the fact that Nagaroth, where the Dark Elves are from, more or less represents America, and Uthuan, I can't ever say that. I don't know why. That word is so hard for me. Oh, to me, always kind of represented England, even though I know Albion is more of the traditional name for the island. But to me, the High Elves kind of represented the English, and the Dark Elves represented Americans, and I always found that hilarious as an American. I thought that was so great. One of my favorite tidbits. But I want to talk a little bit about where these places are and what is there. So maybe as I do this some more, I'll get more familiar with the tech here. I would zoom in on different places and whatnot, but I'm not really sure how to do that at this point. So I'm just going to kind of talk about it with the map up for a minute. Maybe I'll make it. So we'll talk about the Empire itself, right smack in the middle of the northern hemisphere. We can see the Empire pretty big there. I'm going to shrink this down a little bit so maybe you can see some of my face. So the Empire is, I remember when I first got into this, my brother had the Empire Army book, and I was like, why is it called the Empire? Why isn't it just called, like, Humans? Which now I realize is stupid. If it was just called Humans, that would be ridiculous. But the Empire is, like, the main part of our setting in the Warhammer world. Most things take place, most stories and whatnot take place in the Empire. Playing Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, pretty much everything takes place in the Empire. I know 2nd edition, they did have some expansions that there was, like, a Britonian book, the Barony of the Damned, where you could play an adventure in Britonia, which was pretty cool. But most everything takes place in the Empire, which is actually a lot like feudal-ish Germany. I'm sure people realize that, especially if you're European at all, which is really cool. Britonia, if you cross the Grey Mountains to the west of the Empire, you get to Britonia, which is very feudal France, which I love. People really, really enjoy Britonia because of that really feudal feel with knights and peasants and everything. One of my sweet mates, my 2nd year of college, played Britonia, and they were such a pain way back then with everything. Had crazy good armor saves because they were knights covered in armor. Very, very cool feel. Britonia has a really strong following of fans. If you move north of the Empire, you got a couple of major things. There is the nation of Kislev, which is kind of like a mix of Russia and Ukraine and things like that. I love Kislev because it's a land of snow and ice. Further, there's like Troll Country, where there be trolls. Across the Sea of Claws from the Empire is Norska, which is just what it sounds like. The Norse, it's mostly they're not all chaos worshippers, but there's a lot of the Norskins worship chaos openly. The ruinous powers, the chaos gods, whatever you want to call it. They're not all necessarily evil people, but they mostly are known for worshiping chaos. If you go further north, there's the Sea of Chaos above Norska. Then you get to the Northern Wastes, which is just, we could see there's no real information on the map. It's pretty blank. No one's been able to go there and make recordings of anything because you're not going to live long. The people mutate very rapidly up there. It's incredibly dangerous. This is where things like Chaos Warriors often come from. Not always, but it's just not a place for people that want to live and not be mutated. If you go further north, you will get to one of the great Chaos Gates at the poles. So if you go to the North Pole, there is a Chaos Portal there, a big gate into the realm of Chaos. You don't want to go there ever. So let's swing back down to the Empire and see what is south of the Empire. We have the Badlands, which I love. If you cross over mountain ranges through the Blackfire Pass, you get to the Badlands, which is basically orc-infested, mostly Orcs and Goblins. I forgot there is a space between the Badlands and the Empire called the Border Princes, which is a really interesting area to me where it's just like a bunch of city-states, sort of, run by these border princes, they're called, and that are constantly fighting, and borders changing all the time. It's a very place of unrest with humans. Southwest of the Empire, we've got Tilia and Estalia, which are essentially Italy and Spain, respectively, which we've got a little bit of lore about them, not a ton. Tilia, and we don't know too much about them. We got a lot of mercenaries come from Tilia. Other than that, it's like Warhammer versions of Italy and Spain. We do know the capital of the Skaven, Skavenblight, I believe, is underneath the capital of Tilia. Man, I should have looked this one up, but I forget now. It's like Manganiello. Kind of like that. What's the actor's name? Joe Manganiello. Something like that. The capital of Tilia. Further south of the Badlands, and then we get to the Land of the Dead if you continue south, which is the realm. We used to be the realm of Nehek-Hera, where the Tomb Kings are from, but it's overrun with undead. This is the land ruled by Arkin the Black. Before the end times, Nagash is still not around, so Arkin kind of runs this place from his Black Tower, and it's just skeletons all over the place, basically. If you go to the west here, there's a big desert, and we have Araby, which is kind of just what it sounds like. Warhammer version of Arabia. Its own city used to be Tobaro. So we got Bastion Zika's. What's its own city used to be Tobaro? The capital of Tilia? Is that what I'm saying? Did I get that one wrong off the top of my head? But yeah, Araby is the Warhammer version of, Northern Africa, essentially. Pretty cool feel. Unfortunately, we never got an army for Araby. I would love to see that in the future Old World game, which I'm super excited about. After we lost the Old World, Warhammer Fantasy, very excited to see that come back in a few years. Skavenblight. Oh, right. They destroyed it. The Skavenblight was underneath this city, and now it's a ruined city. Nobody lives there. That's right. I remember that now. Thank you, Bastion. Continue further south on this continent, we have the Southlands, which is similar to sub-Saharan Africa. It's all jungly. There are some lizard men here, which is really cool. We don't know too much about the Southlands. It never got developed too much, but it's a neat place. I've been tinkering with the idea for like bonus shows for Grim Podcast or Perilous Adventure to write an adventure where a party goes to either the Southlands or Lustria and encounters lizard men to like basically be Tomb Raiders, more or less, which seems pretty neat to me. That's about it for this continent. If we go back up to the Empire, let's go east. We have the Darklands. If we cross the World's Edge Mountains, the Darklands are the realms of the Chaos Dwarves, or I believe they call themselves the Dawizar. And everybody loves Chaos Dwarves. If you don't know about Chaos Dwarves, do yourself a favor and Google Chaos Dwarves. Scroll a little bit because the first images you might get are probably of the more recent stuff by Forge World. You want to look up the classic Chaos Dwarves with their crazy hats that are like, they're so big. These guys are supposed to be similar to like Prussian armies, from what I understand. Is Prussian the right word? Persian? Something like that. Kind of like Middle Eastern influence dwarves. They got really cool demon engines. They had the Hell Cannon, which I never had for my own Chaos army, but a friend of mine got. He was playing Chaos briefly before he stopped, and I painted up a Hell Cannon for him. Super cool model that sometimes could eat the Chaos Dwarf crew on accident. Brutal piece of machinery. Super cool. They've got Doom Train type things. They've got Earthshaker cannons, and they shoot giant rockets. Chaos Dwarves are awesome. They're dwarves that can do some magic as well. They are known for fire magic and lava and like ash. There was a game I ran a long time ago. We've talked about on a Grim Podcast of Perilous Adventure a little bit. The famous game of the Mountain Dew Can Giant when we had 12 people around, and one of the main bosses was a Chaos Dwarf sorcerer I built in the game and gave him Lore of Fire. And what's really cool about the Chaos Dwarves is because dwarves aren't like the old ones didn't design them to be magic wielders. As they do their magic, they slowly turn to stone, which is super cool. So I had built this Chaos Dwarf sorcerer to be like both his legs were stone, but he can move them a little bit. So him or someone had built for him this like armature for his legs. That he had these like handles that could be like. And he could like move his legs himself, and he fought the party with like a black orc champion that he had like enslaved because the Chaos Dwarves actually created the black orcs out of orcs and hobgoblins they had enslaved as well. Chaos Dwarves are not good people. I mean, they worship chaos and everything, but they were just like awful. I love the Chaos Dwarves, I wish they had gotten more FaceTime with like a proper army book, not just from Forge World, because that really cuts a lot of people off because Forge World is expensive. See, Johnny Trash says, I remember spending hours over the Chaos Dwarf pages in the 5th edition sourcebook trying to figure out what the hell was going on there. Totally fair. They're so messed up. I love them. The newer stuff Forge World made is amazing looking. They're so great. There's like Chaos Dwarf centaurs. They're like bull centaurs, I think they're actually called. Super cool stuff. They have fire demons. I think they're called Nakai or something like that they can summon. Super cool stuff. But the Darklands I always wish got any more development. Not much happens there in like books and things. Would love to know more about the Darklands. Continue further west, we get to the Mountains of Morn. The realm of the Ogre Kingdoms. I love these guys. When these first came out, I was so excited. An army of monsters. So cool. Bring our map up a little bit bigger here again. We can see, it's hard to see because they put the word right over the mountains. We have the Ogre Kingdoms themselves, led by, love this guy, the great over-tyrant himself, Grecius Goldtooth. This guy's so great. He's this massive example of an ogre. He's big for an ogre. And in Warhammer, if you don't know, ogres are about, 10-foot tall gray-skinned behemoths that had skin as thick as a rhino, and they just wanted to eat all day. They literally worship a giant mouth, the Great Maw. So they're, from what I understand from the lore, I don't remember if they ever came out and said this is exactly what happened, but there was this, I think it was the twin-tailed comet, is my kind of personal headcanon, that something struck the planet millennia ago and put this huge hole in the World's Edge Mountains. On the other side of the planet, I don't see it on this map at a glance, there is a place called the Maelstrom, which is this giant hole in the ocean where water constantly pours in. I think what happened, again, my personal headcanon, is that this comet, meteorite, whatever it was, smashed its entire way through the planet out the other side, and the Maelstrom is, one of them is the exit wound and one of them is the entrance wound. And the Great Maw is the god that the ogres worship. And they're all about eating things. It's so great. Their shamans they're called butchers, and I love this so much. They practice gastromancy because they eat things to do magic. It's so great. I love them so much. It took me forever to actually build an Ogre Kingdoms army. It was one of my goals for a long time, and I just never got around to it. I think somebody... Oh, it's JB from the show, from Bruno on Grand Podcast Perilous Adventure. He had Ogre Kingdoms. So I always had this thing that like I didn't want to collect an army that other people I played with have, just because there weren't that many of us in college, so we wanted to keep things a little fresh and different. So it wasn't until a few years ago when we had a few of us, Taylor from Lost Omens podcast, that drops tomorrow, we were going to do a campaign like Tale of Four Armies kind of thing, where we would, every quarter or so of the year, we would build up like another 500 points of a new army and try to fight, and it never even got to the first round of fights, but I started an Ogre Kingdoms army for that, which I borrowed from JB. I was going to buy it off him. He was like, here, you could just borrow it for the year. He's never asked for it back, so if you want it back, JB, just tell me and I'll give it back to you. I ended up painting a lot. I had 1,000 points painted of these ogres. I bought like a Nobbler scrap launcher, which is one of my favorite things ever. Nobblers are like even smaller than goblins. They're meaner than goblins, but they're smarter in some ways. And they work for and with the ogres, mostly because ogres don't really like to eat nobblers, because nobblers don't taste good. Even to ogres, they're too stringy and there's not enough fat on them, which I love. But they'll do it if they have to. Like they'll eat nobblers if there's no other choice. They also eat a log if they don't have a choice, because they're ogres. They got to eat all the time. But the scrap launcher, they would build this little machine, and it would be this big old catapult, and they would just load extra gear in from armies that the ogres had defeated, of swords and helmets and breastplates and axes and blah blah blah, and it would just fling it all like a garbage catapult. It's literally what it was, and it was so great because in the tabletop game it had the killing blow rule, because it's like a sword just comes through the air and slices this dude's head off. It wasn't very good on the table, but it was so great. The idea of it was amazing, and it was pulled by this big rhino, like a woolly rhino thing called a Rhinox, which is just awesome. Later they got, Forge World had made Rhinox riders at one point, but they did eventually get what were called Mournfang cavalry, which rode something else that wasn't a Rhinox and not as good. Let's see. Ogre Kingdoms. Love them. I'll do a whole episode about Ogre Kingdoms at some point. Beyond that, to the west of that, we have Grand Cathay, which is Warhammer China. Cathay is kind of the old name for China in our world. I believe they called themselves that for a while. Same with Nippon. If you go further on, Nippon is Warhammer Japan. And we don't know anything about Nippon. The only thing we know about Cathay is that they worship a dragon god. The new Old World game, please, because I know GW's watching this, please give us something about Cathay and Nippon. Come on. We've got enough of feudal Germany. We want feudal China. I tried to say Chinese and then changed the China partway through. We want feudal China. We want the dragon god. We want dragon warriors. I remember in college, me and my friend Murphy, who we've told stories about on Grim Podcast, A Perilous Adventure, about we had tried to create our own Cathay army where they had like terracotta soldiers and they had dragons and they had like monks. It was really cool. We were going to play test it and just never got around to it because we forget things. We were art students at the time, so it was just we had different ideas all the time and things never happened from it. But Nippon, again, we don't know anything about other than it's Warhammer Japan. South of Grand Cathay, we have the Kingdom of Ind, which, again, Warhammer India. We don't really know anything about this place. We know there are tiger beastmen here. I forget where I've seen that or read that, but that's about all we know. Tiger beastmen, really cool. Think like what are they called? The lawful evil guys from Dungeons and Dragons. Starts with a K, and now I can't remember. They look like tiger people. That's kind of like the look we have of the people that live in Ind. I think there's humans as well, but we know there are tiger primals that have been mentioned here and there. If we go to the west of the Kingdom of Ind, we have the Hinterlands of Kuresh. I mean, I guess it's supposed to be like Polynesia, Indonesia. I don't know anything about that. Rakshasa, yes, Rakshasa. There's a K in it. It didn't start with K. I was off on that. Thank you, Bastion. I can't talk today. Rakshasa. Those guys are cool. The Hinterlands of Kuresh. I don't know if we know anything about this place. It's forested or jungle. That's about it. That's about all we got. West, going any further west here, there's virtually nothing about these places. I can't even remember what it's called. I can't quite read it on my own map here. But we don't really know anything about those other than there might be elven way towers and things. So let's jump way back to the Empire in the middle there, and let's travel west. I'm so bad at my directions. I have to think about it every time. Let's travel west across the Great Ocean. We'll leave the Old World, and we're going to go to, I got to say it again. I'm going to just get rid of the L. I'm pretty sure you just kind of don't pronounce the L. Uthulan. The land of the High Elves. So High Elves, I played in Warhammer Fantasy Warhammer Fantasy Battles, is what it actually was called, the Warhammer tabletop game. High Elves were one of my armies. My first ever was Beastmen, Beasts of Chaos, however you want to say it. They'll be my one true love for Warhammer always. But I had High Elves as well. Love these guys. I love the lore of them. This island, we'll do a whole episode about High Elves and Uthulan, and hopefully you guys can help me pronounce this by the time I do that episode. And I love how this place is broken down into different lands. They all have their different feel. We have like the Sword Masters of Hoeth, who are one part lore masters, one part sword masters. They study books and swords, and that's about it. Love those guys. They were great on the table. We've got the land of Trace. Is it Trace or Charse? Now I can't remember. I feel like I had said it one way for like 10 years, and then I realized it was the other. But for right now, I'm going to say Trace because I can't remember. I don't want to look it up while I'm streaming. Somebody wants to help me in the chat. I'd appreciate it. We got great stories like Eltharion the Grim, who lost most of his people to Grom the Paunch, this goblin invasion of this big fat goblin who would ride a chariot pulled by 3 wolves. Get in the shot. Not just 2. He had 3 wolves pulling his chariot. He was so awesome. I love that old model of this big fat goblin holding a big axe over his head. But he was Eltharion's like thorn in his side forever. What are the other places? We have the what is it called? Nagaroth, which is like the northwestern area where that what used to be connected to Nagaroth, where the island literally broke off from the mainland, when they had their civil war. In the middle of it, they have like their home island where the Phoenix King, the current Phoenix King at the time of the end times, was Finnabar, where he lives. Lothern, I believe it is. Kind of forgetting at the moment, but I'm going to go over that more detail in the future. Uthlin, super cool place. The whole island shouldn't really be an island. It was part of the continent, and it should sink, but there are a bunch of elven mages that are like stuck in this thousands-year-long ritual on the island, on the middle in their capital city there in Lothern, where they are doing this ritual like forever to keep the island afloat, and they basically sacrifice their immortal lives to be doing this ritual forever. The magic keeps them from from needing sustenance or sleeping, keeps them alive, but they can't do anything else but keep the island afloat, which is pretty cool. If we travel further west across the ocean, we get to Nagaroth, which is a frozen, not wasteland. There's forests and whatnot here, but this is the land of the Dark Elves. To them, they call themselves I almost said Drukari. That's from 40K. Drukai. We used to say it Druchi when we were younger, but it's like, I'm going to type it in the chat because I can't spell out loud. I think it's Druchii, which I believe people have told me in the past should be pronounced Drukai or Drukai or Druchi. Yes, yeah, Bastion is the land of Malketh. So Malketh has a really interesting story. He is the supreme leader of the Dark Elves. He was supposed to be next in line to be the Phoenix King of the High Elves. He was a High Elf. I mean, the only real difference between High Elves and Dark Elves are where they live, but don't tell them that. And they have the thing called what's it called? The spell is Flames of the Phoenix. Is it the Eternal Flame? And whoever is going to become the Phoenix King has to walk through the flames, and they will be unscathed, and then they are worthy to be the Phoenix King. When Malketh went through, he was horrendously burned, and it was clear he was not meant to be the Phoenix King, and he started this whole civil war, him and his mom, Morathi, or Marathi, or Moratai, however you want to pronounce her name, and they basically, they seceded the lands of Nagaroth, became their own land, and it's when Uthlin split off from the continent. Super cool stuff. We'll do a lot of stuff about the elves in the future. Dark elves, high elves, wood elves. I did skip over Athel Loren in Britonia, but we'll talk about that another day as well. If you go south from Nagaroth, you get to the New World and Lustria. Love this place. So the New World is called that because the Empire is part of the Old World, like that continent, essentially Europe. There, the New World, there are some settlements of humans there. There is a major trading city. I think it's called Skaggy or Scraggy. I can't remember off the top of my head now. I love this place, though. The Lustria is like South America, Warhammer version, where the lizard men are, they preside. They rule this area. You don't really want to mess with them because they think, spoiler alert, they're literally aliens. They are not of this world. Their temples and things we learned in the end times, which hopefully the new old world tabletop game will kind of retcon. They literally flew away in their temple spaceships. Kind of like Kingdom of the Crystal Skull just left a bad taste in people's mouths. It was just kind of like, really? Not a huge fan of that, but love the lizard men. They were an army I always wish I had done, and just never did, you know? I'm not sure why. Just never got around to it. Oh, Murphy. That's why. It's Murphy's fault. Murphy played Lizardmen in college, so I never did, again, because we didn't want to, like, double dip in these armies, because we didn't want to have Lizardmen fight Lizardmen. That's not fun when you get to play 1 or 2 games a week for a few years. I love Lizardmen. They're super cool. I love the idea of them. With the Blood Bowl set I just got, I 100% plan on getting a Lizardmen team for that, which looks really fun, and I had this really cool campaign when I was in college. Conquest of the New World, I believe it was called. It was a map-based campaign when they used to do fun stuff like that, like the year after Storm of Chaos. And it came with this map, and it had all these rules to play a map-based campaign where you're trying to take over parts of the New World in games of Warhammer Fantasy. I remember starting it 2 or 3 times and never getting more than a round or two, but it had really cool systems of like finding ancient gold and using that to like buy mercenaries or get new troops or getting bonuses in the game, and that you could like steal other people's gold and send assassins after their characters. It was really cool. If you play Warhammer Fantasy at all, definitely look it up. I believe it was called Conquest of the New World. I bet I might have one on the shelf behind me, one of my old books, but I'm not gonna go digging through that during the stream. I think that more or less covers it for the world at large. I'm trying to think of anything else major I've missed. I did mention wood elves are the third type of elves. I think they call themselves Aserai. I forgot the high elves call themselves Acer. Wood elves live mostly in Britonia and the Empire in the forests there. But this, the Warhammer world is my favorite fantasy setting because of Albion I mentioned very, very briefly as we went across. Albion is the island of mist and shadow where things like fen beasts live, which I'll do a whole episode about once I get myself to know more about it, because I don't know too much about Albion. Unfortunately, there was a source book about it for Warhammer Fantasy Battles that came out like just before I started. I started playing in like 2003 or so. And I think that book came out like the year before, and it was already impossible to find anywhere once I started playing the game. But Albion's a cool place. What else was I going to say there? Distracted myself. I'll look at my notes. What else was I going to talk about? Let's see. I have past role-playing stuff, things kind of talked about a couple things that came up. The end, after I go over the lore focus for the week, I want to, if we have any viewer questions, this being the first episode, I didn't have any viewer questions before, but if people have questions that come up between episodes, feel free to email me, professionalcasual, professionalcasual.com, the email at theprofessionalcasual@gmail.com. There we go. You can also look us up on Facebook, which is just facebook.com/professionalcasual. You can submit a question through Twitter at toptiercasual. On Instagram. I don't know. You message on Instagram. That's a thing. That's also the Professional Casual as well. People in the chat, if anybody has a question about anything kind of about the Warhammer world, I want to keep it not terribly focused. I touched on most of the races here and there. I didn't talk too much about the dwarves. Again, we'll do a whole episode about dwarves for sure. I might do some kind of guests in the future. I don't want to jump into that right away, but like my brother, he got into it playing dwarves. Taylor from Lost Omens, that drops tomorrow, played dwarves for a long time. He was really into them. I love dwarves in Warhammer. They're very Tolkien dwarves, but that's fine. I'm okay with that. So in the future, this part of the show will be more about what's the word I'm looking for? Viewer questions and things. Professional Casual Network. Wait a minute, that's me. Somebody else is watching here. So what about orcs? Orcs with a K are 40K, you nerd. In Warhammer Fantasy, they're spelled with a C, just like Tolkien. But yeah, orcs are all over the place. We talked about they're mostly in the Badlands, south of the Empire. They're also in the Northern Steppes. I'll bring up the map one more time. The Northern Steppes. The Eastern Steppes, there's lots of orcs there. Goblins used to have a very Mongol design to them with their fuzzy hats and stuff. But yeah, orcs are pretty much everywhere. They are a nuisance. They're, fungus people. They've got squigs are one of my favorite things in the world in fantasy. I love squigs. But yeah, orcs can be found just about everywhere. I'll do an episode about orcs as well. I did play Orcs and Goblins for a time as one of the armies in Warhammer Fantasy. I actually sold them to Taylor years ago. I had like 120, 140 goblins. I had like 60 orcs and a bunch of trolls and a giant, the big boy he was called. I think he's been named Francis since then. And I ended up selling him my orcs because animosity. I hated that rule. There was a time we were playing at our local store, Bearded Dragon, a sponsor of the network, beardeddragongames.online. Use the code Professional Casual at checkout, and you get free shipping in the continental U.S. use the code at checkout. Maybe you can contact Anthony. Maybe he can do some other kind of deal for you if you're not in the continental U.S. But I remember playing a game at the store against Taylor, of all people, and my Orcs and Goblins, I rolled a 1 for animosity. They would just do whatever they wanted or not do anything. It was literally 3 units in a row, and I threw the die across the room, and I was like, I'm done. I'm not playing this army anymore. And I sold it to him. Nobody else I play with ever has that problem with Orcs and Goblins. I actually just watched a battle report the other day of Mini Wargaming. Steve and Cullen did a game of... So I sold the army. Those guys were the worst. But I love Orcs in the fluff and everything. They're so great with their like Cockney accents, and they're just so goofy. They're so great. Let's see. So that looks like that's about it for this week. Next week, I'm going to focus more on the Empire itself. I'll talk a little bit about each of the provinces. I lost the word for a second there. That happens a lot. I'll read up a little bit about each one. Talk a little bit about where the characters from a Grim Podcast or Perilous Adventure are from, because we know a little bit about where they're from now. We know Bruno and Carl are both from Altdorf. We know Mina is from... no, I can't remember. We decided if it was Ostland or Ostermark. And Lucky is actually also from Reichland. If you are not a patron to see the interview with Tim and Lucky, he did reveal what town he's actually from. Don't ask him. Don't ask Tim, though. He probably doesn't remember. I'll call him out a little bit. Seasdot is where Mina is from. Lake Town. That is, I can't remember if it's Talabek Land, or not Talabek Land, Ostland or Ostermark that we decided. It was Ostland? Thank you. I mean... It helps that people know our stuff better than we do. I just got too much in my head trying to remember everything. Other than that, let me know if you're watching the YouTube version, comment here would be a great place for questions as well. Let me know what you want to see going forward. Let me know what we could do to improve. Like I said, I'm figuring out what works here, figuring out the technology a little bit. OBS is, I don't know, my internet's been a pain today. I know it's cut out a couple times. Thank you, Bastion, for listening. Really appreciate it. Spoiler alert, Tim does not know where Lucky is from. Tim should. He said it in the interview. I told him where Lucky's from. But, we'll talk about that a little bit next time. But yeah, I'd love to hear some feedback about what people like, what people didn't like, what people want to see on here, what we can do to improve it in the future. And remember where he's from. I'll talk about that next time. Other than that, I think we're pretty good here. This was super fun for me. I love talking about Warhammer stuff. Nice interaction in the chat. I really appreciate that from everybody. Like we used to say, for next week, tell your friends, tell your mom, tell your friend's mom. Let's get a nice, big, robust community for this and just chat about Warhammer. Next week will be the Empire. Let me know if anything specific you want to know about the Empire for next week, or let me know any other questions about the Warhammer world that we can do in the viewer section. And I'll see you then. I'll hang out for just a minute more, see if anybody has any more questions for this week. Otherwise, I'll say see you next Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. In the meantime, while I give people a second to see if we have any more questions, Grim Podcast or Perilous Adventure, if you don't know already, is our Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th Edition actual play. We're playing the Enemy Within, and it's so awesome. I know as the GM of that game, you might think, oh, he has to say it's awesome, but like it's the best RPG. It's the best game I've been in, hands down. It's the best game. Bastion, yes, thank you. 8 p.m. GMT was at Greenwich Mean Time. For those of you on the other side of the pond. The one reason why I scheduled it for this time, because I feel like that should be, I imagine that would be a pretty good time for our European listeners to check in, so it's not like midnight. Because I thought about doing it at like 8 p.m. our time, and I was like, it's 1 o'clock over there. Who's gonna be joining? Thanks, Johnny. Says the Empire has many great places. I'm happy with any of them. I will I'll try to do kind of like I did around the world today. I'll kind of go around the Empire and talk a little bit about each place. I got what was the second edition book called? Sigmar's Heirs, all about the Empire. I'll be reading that all week to refresh my memory about things about the different provinces. Cannot wait to talk about the Moot. Everybody loves the Moot. Where halflings are from. So yeah, come check us out next week. Tomorrow night on this Twitch channel is, the Power Phase, Marvel Crisis Protocol, Battle Report. Tim and Big Chuck will be throwing down. Just got a message. They're going to talk about what they're playing. Give me just a second. We've got Web Warriors, and with Thanos. Web Warriors featuring Thanos, which sounds pretty cool. And I do believe Tim is playing Brotherhood in some way, shape, or form. Last time he was going to take Magneto, but he was thinking about maybe not taking Magneto and having Mystique lead him instead. So even if you're not into miniature games or Marvel stuff, check it out. It's a great time. We try to play a more casual game where we're just having fun, kind of shooting the shit back and forth, and it's a good time. When's Lost Omens? Thanks for asking, Bastion. That drops tomorrow, the 21st of December, our brand new actual play show where Danny is running Pathfinder 2 and tries to wrangle 5 of us knuckleheads playing the Extinction Curse adventure path. It's so much fun. You definitely need to check it out. It's episode 0. We're going to talk about our not character creation. We've had our characters made, but we're going to talk about our characters. Danny runs us through awesome questions to help us get to know our characters and listeners get to know the characters. And then episode 1 will also be coming out tomorrow, where we got to put on a circus show. So see if it's successful or not. Super excited for you guys to meet my character, Brennan Nimblemind. I've been having a great time playing him, and everybody around the table just has so much fun with that game. We laugh constantly, so hopefully you guys will too. Thanks for joining me. This has been super fun. I can't wait to do it next week. Other than that, Merry/Happy Christmas, and I'll see you next Sunday. Thanks again. Bye-bye.